everyone. Today I'm here with Robert Talisse. He's a member of the Progress Network, and we were together just about a year ago talking about his last book, Overdoing Democracy. And now we have the sequel to Overdoing Democracy, which is not Democracy Has Died or the End of Democracy, but Sustaining Democracy. So how to save democracy. Really looking forward to hearing from him, his suggestions for that. So Robert Talisse is a professor at Vanderbilt University. And like I said a year ago, we talked about his last book. So I'll put that somewhere up here where you can click and listen to that interview. So welcome. Should we go with Robert or Bob?
Bob is good.
All right. Welcome, Bob.
Hi, Emma. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
Great.
So as always, I like to start with the problem. You did it as well in your book. And it's a really interesting problem because on the face of it, it seems like a really obvious one. If you're American, it's one that I think a lot of people agree with, that politics is really hostile, it's out of control, it's toxic. They want that to get better. They want that to be solved. And at the same time, they also hold a view a lot of the time that you summarize really well. So I'm just going to read it because I liked it so much.
Thank you.
The view is this: the political situation is dire. We need to take a stand. The time for weighing the various perspectives has expired. If you think there's another side to the discussion, you must be on it. And if you're on the other side, there's nothing to discuss. So I think a lot of us tend to hold both of these views at one time. And it's not, I think, not so clear how those two views affect one another. Like the dots have not been connected. So if you could connect those dots for us, what do those two views have to do with the other?
Sure, Emma. Thanks. That was lovely. The book is addressed to this problem that I think is inherent in the office of democratic citizenship. That is, I think that the solution to this problem is to recognize that it doesn't go away, that it's just part of what it is to be a democratic citizen is to be in a position where you have to confront a certain tension. And that tension, just to put it again, is, democracy needs us to be active citizens. We need to take responsibility for the political world around us and organize and collaborate and join coalitions and act. But democracy also needs citizens to be reflective, needs them to think, to exchange ideas, to weigh options. And the tension has to do with the fact that the tension between those two, the active and the reflective side, has to do with the fact that when we really care about politics, when we feel the urgency of a political moment, it's because we think that there's something morally important at stake in the moment. And so that urges us, right? That urges us to get involved, to start doing things, to join a coalition, to act. And it also turns out that when we think that politics, the stakes are high in politics, it's because we find that the people with whom we disagree about what should be done or what should happen we tend to see them as not only wrong about what should happen or what should be done, we tend to see them as in the wrong. That is, urgent political disagreements, motivating political issues, typically invoke our deeper conceptions of justice. And so when we're most urged to be active, these are also the contexts in which we're most often inclined to see the people with whom we disagree as on the wrong, not just the other side, as on the wrong side of the question. And so the tension emerges because you say, well, the people who disagree with me about this issue, they're not merely mistaken. They're on the side of injustice. Why should I care about them at all? Why should I give them any due regard? Why should I show them civility? And in fact, we start thinking, treating the other side as if they are owed regard and civility and respect is a kind of concession to them. And why concede anything to people who, if they had their own way, the world would get less just? So that's the tension. And I think a good deal of democratic theory aims directly, more or less directly, often pretty indirectly, at trying to show how that tension emerges only when citizens are falling short of their responsibilities, or only when democratic institutions are not designed well. What I argue in Sustaining Democracy is no, this tension is the product of responsible democratic citizenship, right? Democratic
That's a little alarming, though.
Well,
so we're doing things correctly, and this is the situation.
That is exactly right. But I have what in philosophy is sometimes called a tragic view of the moral life. I think that if you're living well, if you are meeting your responsibilities as a moral agent, you are inevitably going to confront cases where you have to choose not between good and bad, but between good and good. And that when you have to choose between good and good, you always lose out on doing some good, right? So I think that there are in the broader moral arena, there are lots of cases where wrongdoing is inevitable because our only choices are between incompatible things that we have obligations to do. You can't do everything that you're required to do, so something that you're required to do gets undone. I think that the office of democratic citizenship, the status of being a democratic citizen, involves confronting this tension, the need to see justice done in the political world, and the need to treat your fellow citizens, including your political enemies, as your equals. It looks as if when the chips are down, treating your enemies as your equals concedes something to them and in a certain way falls short of your responsibilities for justice. And I just want to say in the book, yeah, that's where we're at, and there's no fixing it. That's just one of the features of democracy, and we better manage the dysfunctions that can emerge when we try to navigate that tension with the idea that it can be resolved in some final way. Does that make sense?
Well, so you mean essentially that this is going to come up no matter what. That's an inherent tension of being in a democracy, that you're going to have to deal with people that you think are moving us in an unjust direction.
I think that that's right.
And then where do we go from? There has to be somewhere to go from there.
Well, where we go from there is trying to figure out some reason to defend the thought, which I think is the central thought of democracy, which is the central thought of democracy is knowing what's right doesn't entitle you to get your way in a democracy. Knowing what justice requires doesn't mean you get to call the shots. Being mistaken about what's right doesn't mean you don't have a say in a democracy. These are sort of these are the hard pills to swallow in a democratic society. I think that they are fundamental features of a free society. One of the upshots of our equality and freedom is that we're going to disagree. One of the upshots of the fact that we're going to disagree about politics, including disagree about justice and freedom and equality, is that some people with whom we disagree are going to look to us as if they are agents of injustice and oppression. And so I don't deny that there are certain limits. There are certain kinds of views that are beyond the pale of a democratic society. And it's a different question about how to deal with the adherents of those views. But I think that even within the spectrum of permissible democratic opinion, you're going to find lots of perspectives that from your own opinion are going to look to you not consonant with justice. And so the solution, I think, is, and this is why the book is called Sustaining Democracy, I think that we need to work on ourselves. I mean, it's almost like a political self-help book, right? It's a self-help book for the democratic citizen, right?
Yes, yes.
You've got to figure out ways to ward off the thought that democracy works only when everyone agrees with you, right? I think that there's a huge tendency in the political world to sort of flirt with that idea, that only if everyone were just like me, democracy would finally be fixed. But Emma, think about how anti-democratic that thought is. That democracy can only work when there's no real disagreement. right? Well, okay, why bother with elections? Why
Yeah, I
bother with
mean,
debates?
I would say actually that nowadays there are quite a lot of people that maybe do need to do the first step of the convincing that we do want to live in a democracy, precisely because of this inherent tension that you're talking about, right? Like it doesn't feel productive in a way, and it feels a little like this can't possibly be the answer, that this is just how it is. You must deal with people who are not only that you think that their views will make a less just world, but sometimes like actively moving us towards evil. I mean, that's the rhetoric that's out there, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, like you said, I really like the phrase self-help for democratic citizens. And the prescriptions in the book were a lot more like inward looking, a lot more like search inside yourself than I was expecting. Um,
I'm a
because
philosopher after all.
yeah, that makes sense. Because surely the answer can't be, well, we just go on hating everyone around us and thinking that they're idiots and that, their ideas are terrible and moving us in a bad direction. I mean, that doesn't seem like a healthy space to be living in.
That's right. So what I try to argue in the book, picking up on that, is, you know, this tension uh, arises because we look at our political foes and see all of their vices and all of their misguided political ideas and all of their bad value commitments and unjust objectives. What I try to argue in the book is that, yeah, but unless you take steps to maintain civil and democratic relations with at least some of your opponents, your political alliances start to fracture. So it's an argument that says, you've got the responsibility to see justice done. You've got the responsibility to treat your fellow citizens as your equals. Sometimes we think in the heat of the moment, let me pursue justice and forget about, anybody who doesn't agree with me, because even they're my equals, but they're on the side of injustice. So who cares about them? Let me just band together with my allies. And what I try to argue is that if you do that, if you cut off democratic relations with all of your foes, with any potential critic, you actually wind up sort of diminishing the efficacy of your political alliances. Because here's what happens. There's this well-documented cognitive phenomenon called belief polarization. We hang around with like-minded others and we start becoming more extreme in all kinds of ways. And so the first book, the Overdoing Democracy book, is largely about that. And that's that it spoils our ability to treat others who aren't part of our own team like our fellow citizens. However, there's another feature of the belief polarization phenomenon. There's another effect or impact of belief polarization that takes center stage in sustaining democracy, which is the fact that belief polarization makes us more extreme and partisan and strident and dogmatic. And it turns out that our more extreme, partisan, strident, and dogmatic selves are also more conformist, also more invested in homogeneity among the people we see as in our own group. Now, you can, listeners, people who are tuning into this can already, I think, detect where the argument is going. Because I want to say, especially if you're somebody who thinks, the political order needs some pretty radical, drastic, maybe incremental, but nonetheless significant changes, especially if you're a progressive, you want to see things change. Conformity with your ally, conformism within your alliances is deadly for progressive political agendas. And no matter what your political objective is, conformism within your coalition is deadly, because as groups become more invested in their alikeness, they start excommunicating members. Because, by the way, you went to high school, I went to high school. The world is a lot like high school.
Yeah, we're all just living in cliques. We're all just deciding which lunch table to sit,
This
sit
is
at.
exactly right. And so as we become more conformist, we become more invested in policing the border between who's in and who's out. As we become more invested in policing that border between, the in-group and the out-group, we become more insistent on making sure that everybody in our group is authentic. So we become really invested in detecting posers. I was a kid in the 80s. The poser thing was a big thing. Like, who's a poser, right? Especially in punk rock circles, were you a poser? So it is a lot like high school cliques. So coalitions wind up becoming more conformist. When they become more conformist, they also become more hierarchical. So they become less internally democratic, because just like in a high school clique, if you want a real tight coalition, you need a real strong tastemaker to tell you who's in and who's out, right? Oh, if you're wearing that kind of shoe, you're not part of our group, and so you need a leader, right?
This is where you see the state of the U.S. It's a little bit of a different side of the problem, I think, that we're used to hearing about, in terms of people who voted for Trump and people who were never Trumpers / on the left hate each other. You're talking about that, but you're actually also talking about let's say within a particular political group, because we've gone so far down the belief polarization lane, those allyships have started to fracture.
That's right. Look at Liz Cheney. Right? This is a conservative, right? This is not a progressive member of the Republican Party. This is somebody whose voting record is sort of very much allied with Trump Republicanism, gets pulled out of a leadership position because she publicly says that Trump is not telling the truth and that Trump is lying about the election. Right? She gets removed from the leadership position. Not one of the cool kids, doesn't get to sit at the table at the table anymore. So when groups become more conformist and hierarchical, they become more and more focused on policing their internal dynamics. They lose sight of the broader political objectives that they're supposed to be pursuing, and they shrink, because they start expelling people who are perceived to be posers or inauthentic or half-hearted. And when that happens, you wind up with political coalitions that might be very loud because they are composed nearly exclusively of hardliners. But for that very reason, despite their volume, despite the noise they're able to make, they're not able to get anything done politically. In politics, you've got to build coalitions. Right? You got to grow them, right? So the tension in democratic citizenship tempts us to think that, the problem has to do with how am I going to get along with my Republican, family members, and how am I going to talk to, the person who lives across the street from me who's got a Trump flag out, this sort of. And that is a problem. It's just not the whole of the problem of partisan animosity. The whole problem of partisan animosity really says, well, those people who you hate, whose politics you despise, who you can't see as your equals, they are the occasion for a problem that really has to do with you and your friends. And if you don't take steps to mitigate some of the pressures that emerge when you break off civil relations with at least some of your critics and some of your foes, those divisive forces turn inward, and you start turning your friends into enemies. And we can't have that if we want to succeed in politics. That's the argument of the book. What do you think?
Okay. Part of me is I thought we had a big of enough problem already with the Republicans and Democrats. And I mean, of course, there's lots of people who don't fall into those, straight lines. But I thought that was enough of a problem to deal with, that we all hate each other. Okay, now you're telling us there's a secondary problem, which I think will ring true for people. I think that it's, you brought up one particular example in the group about a self-defense training group that sort of broke down in this way. And I think that it's pretty easy for people to think of examples in the political realm, either on the left or on the right or somewhere in between or to the more extreme, that they've seen, these kinds of purity tests rolling out where people start to get ejected from the group and the beliefs become more extreme. But okay, so now that we've outlined the secondary part of the problem, we now have a bigger problem. What are the prescriptions here?
So I think that the prescription, I am not, as I'd mentioned earlier, I'm a democratic theorist who is, to use a Greek word, I'm an agonist, right? I think that democracy is about, conflict. It's conflict that is conducted within the parameters of certain kinds of processes and norms, but it's conflict. There's a lot of democratic theorists who think that democracy is about being friends and, kind of everybody getting together and singing Kumbaya or whatever. That's just not me, okay.
But that's good. That's good to, you mentioned this in the beginning too, and I didn't pick it up, that just knowing that, as like having that in your head as an approach to like, okay, there's going to be conflict here. That's just, it is what it is. And we're choosing it anyway. And just being okay with that is one step.
But, I think that the challenge of a democratic, the challenge of the democratic life is to look at that kind of conflict and feel good about it, even if it's real conflict, even if you think the losses are real losses when you lose, right? To see the democratic experiment as a commitment to equality, even though that means that at certain important junctures, justice will not prevail. Right?
Yeah, no, it's the big picture democratic view.
That's right. So I think that the solution can't be eliminate polarization. I don't think that there is a way to do that, because like-minded coalitions are intrinsic to what democracy is all about. We have to work together in tight coalitions. So I think you just have to figure out ways to manage the most destructive effects of belief polarization. And I think that is, again, to pick up on the self-help thing, that is something that each of us has to try to do inside ourselves. And I don't think we can do it only by having more carefully curated and orchestrated interactions with our political enemies. A lot of empirically minded democratic theorists are interested in designing deliberative spaces and citizen jury experiments for that purpose. I don't reject any of that. I just think it's insufficient, because I think that the change has to be within ourselves. We have to take steps to fight the tendency towards conformity within our allyships. That makes sense. And I think the way that we do that is we take steps to make sure that we expose ourselves to ideas and arguments and political problems that don't come for us prepackaged in the trappings of the politics of the moment, of the partisan divides that prevail right now. So I think that democracy needs citizens to claim for themselves moments of solitude, solitary reflection, detachment, where they don't withdraw from politics, but they withdraw from the political fray, from their friends and their enemies alike, and think, reflect about political ideas and arguments that are not so easily imported into things that are happening right now. If you go Google, this is what democracy looks like, you will get instantly tens of thousands of images, all depicting the very same thing. People in streets with signs, communicating a unified message of some kind, making a demand, pointing out an injustice. That is what democracy looks like. I don't want to say that's not part of democracy. That is what democracy looks like. But democracy also looks like a guy sitting in a chair reading a book. That is also an essential act act of democratic citizenship, opening up Aristotle and seeing Aristotle thinks there's 8 different kinds of democracy? What is he talking about? 8 different kinds of democracy. What does that mean? None of these kinds of democracy look like my democracy. How is that? Right? Now, I think that kind of not only detached from the fray of the present, not only detached from our alliances and rivalries right now, but a kind of detachment where we're exposed to broader political ideas that aren't easily seen as at home in the contemporary world, in the contemporary political travail. I think that's really important to just say, wow, Jane Addams has got a view about democracy that I'm not sure that that's democracy at the end of the day. It sounds a little religious. Can democracy be a religion? Like, I don't know. Is she a Republican? Is she a Democrat? That's an irrelevant question at this juncture. I'm not sure whether she's a progressive, which she's kind of conservative, it seems, right? So exposing ourselves to reminding ourselves that not all political thinking and not all democratic political thinking is easily translatable into the contingencies of our democracy at the moment. I think we lose sight of that. And it seems that the battles that we're fighting right here and right now strike us as so urgent precisely because we think that the political world around us is all the politics there is.
This is actually like democratic citizens go to Walden Pond.
Good. That's exactly right. But let me.
I'm thinking.
I think that's right, and that's a nice way to put it. Had I not already written the book, I would have added that. So that's that. So I thank you for that. That's right. But let me just say one quick thing. The point of this detached reflection, again, is not to come to understand the other side or to hear them or to maybe think, oh, maybe they've got a point. I mean, those are all good things to do if you can get there, right? I'm not saying that, never try to figure out whether the people who disagree with you might have a point. Saying that's not the point of the kind of reflection I'm advocating. The kind of reflection I'm advocating sort of has 2 kind of objectives. One is to sort of suck you out of the moment, right? Sort of see politics as a broader human endeavor than what can be fit into the, in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats, it's more than Barack Obama and Donald Trump, fighting it out. But I also think that when it does turn to thinking about not just politically different ideas, but politically opposed ideas, I think it's important, and there's some emerging now empirical stuff that suggests that my conjecture in the book might be right. So that's always nice. Depolarization, managing polarization might in part be the task of finding out what the other side really thinks and trying to understand the rationale for why they think that thing and trying to see the other side's view as more reasonable than you thought it was, and maybe seeing that they've got some points to make, all the rest. That's part of the story. It's starting to look, and I conjecture and predict in the book that it will become more obviously the case, that you get stronger depolarization effects when people, in fact, do sit down with their political opponents, their interaction is not organized around the for and against model of talking about politics, but instead it's organized around the model where I say to you, my political opponent, Emma, where do you think I've gone wrong? What's the weakest part of my view? Where do you think my position is objectionable? That's not conceding anything to your opposed ideas. I still get to think you, Emma, are mixed up about politics and think all kinds of crazy things about politics. I mean, I still get to hold all of those negative assessments about your positive views. Now I'm not trying to fight it out. I'm not trying to convince you about who's got the right view about taxation or immigration or whatever it is. Now I'm just saying, okay, Emma, where am I wrong? What do you think the most severe problem is? Why are you unconvinced by me? And I say, that allows you simply to exercise and to remind yourself of the idea that I think really gets lost with the polarization phenomenon and the drive to this urgency to act, that Even if you're on the right side of all the political questions, it doesn't mean that your political thinking can't be improved.
Hmm.
Right? You can always improve you haven't had the last political thought. Even if you're right about all the issues, there still might be a better way to formulate it. There still might be an objection that you have to figure out a way to evade. There still might be ways to improve your political thinking, even if you're right. And that thought, it's a sort of, it's a philosopher's thought. The epistemic success is not strictly about having the right beliefs. It's about having the right beliefs with the right kind of rationale, the logos to back it up. And epistemic improvement is something that's always possible. And who would deny that? Who really in their right mind would say, yeah, I've had the last political thought that I or anybody else needs to have, because now I figured it out. Now I could stop thinking about it. Nobody has that idea. And I just want to say, take advantage of what looks to me like a really good philosophical intuition that we all have. My thinking about this, even though I'm right, my thinking can always be improved. I can always learn a better way of stating the truth. And I think that orchestrated and choreographed deliberative encounters that build on that model. Why does the other side disagree? Rather than the model, who's right? I think is, and some empirical stuff is suggesting that I'm right about this, given what I think belief polarization is and how it works. The conjecture is the model that says, why are they unconvinced, will have more appreciable depolarization effect.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, and reading the book and listening to you talk just now, isn't it just like a philosopher to say like the solution to depolarization is like go off and read Aristotle, right? Of course. But it's funny because we did another episode with Jonathan Haidt. I'll also link to that here. And he as well, I mean, went pretty immediately to the ancient philosophers when we asked him like, what advice do you have for people? He was like, read Marcus Aurelius. That was the next step. And on the one hand, I can see people thinking like, I don't know, the road between Aristotle and depolarizing my thoughts about people who think that Trump
won the election.
Yeah. Like that road seems to be like a very, very long road. On the other hand, I kind of love it because it is this simple reminder that our time that we live in now is not the only time. Humans have been around humaning for a long time, and pulling ourselves out of the moment is sometimes extremely hard to do and extremely important. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. What would you say to someone who's like, first of all, I don't have time to go read Aristotle. I'm ruminating about what's for dinner. I can't ruminate about Aristotle. Like, it's this, I don't know. I'm just wondering how you would manage some of the objections to people being like, you want me to go read philosophical treatises?
Well, so that was so good. That was just a favorite example because I do think reading Aristotle is one way to just totally get sucked out of, But again, I wouldn't say it even has to be reading. It's like, well, just try. I think it's important away from the gaze of your friends who are going to try to police you for compliance with group expectations, and away from the gaze of your enemies who are going to arouse in you the affect that's going to lead you to comply with your group expectations. It's like, sit at home in a chair for a moment and just try to order your political thoughts in a way that just gets at the fundamental. What's the most fundamentally important political thing? What is it? Is it freedom? Is it equality? What is it? Right? Read the preamble to the Constitution and think through the thoughts, right? Now, someone says, I don't have time for the Constitution. Maybe the right response then is, well, do you have time then to be an activist? I'm not so sure, right? So, again, Aristotle is just Marcus Aurelius, another interesting character, Stoic, is also a good example. But, again, I just think the idea is to encounter political thoughts that can't be so easily fit into,
Mm,
are you for Trump or are you for Biden? It can't be so
right.
easily sort of translated into the politics of the day. And let me just say one thing for the progressives who might be horrified by the thought. I think that there's something really dangerous about the move to treat everything as if its significance lies strictly in its ability to speak to the political moment right now. In a lot of, I'll just say, in a lot of what I hear as a faculty member from even people at my own university, but universities in general, there is this push that, content, education has to speak to the present, to what's happening now, to the politics and the political struggles and the objectives going on now, to students' experience now.
Mm,
And it's not that I think that that's valueless, it's valuable. So, but that can't be the whole thing. Sometimes the political significance, sometimes there is a kind of political significance that consists in a text or an idea or an argument not talking to you where you're at right now, but pulling you out of that
yeah.
context. That's politically significant too. And so it's not like, well, why does everything have to be significant? I would say sometimes significance consists in a kind of exposure to something that's speaking from elsewhere, that's not talking directly to you. That's a politically significant encounter. And I think that, again, I've got a certain view about how progressive politics in democratic societies works that runs something like this. Progressive political agendas have to be fast, cheap, and out of control, right? You need, right, to quote the Errol Morris documentary, which I love, right? You need lots of ideas, lots of people trying different things, moving in different directions, and seeing what happens, right? Not centrally sort of policing the whole thing, but you just need lots of movements going in all. And I think that some of the tendency, and this is particularly true in online spaces, is to constrain all that, to shrink it, to turn things into a certain kind of doctrine, typically in highly polarized contexts like ours in the United States, or like mine in the United States. Those doctrines and pieties are organized more directly around opposition to whatever the other side's doing than any positive idea. And you can see, once the discussion among coalitions and alliances gets to a point where they have to express a positive commitment, in the United States, they almost always fall apart. And so I'm just going to give two examples. The tax the rich dress.
Oh no! Oh gosh, I feel like AOC is just getting trash all over the place about that dress.
Right, no, I'm not even going to. I'm not commenting on, the appropriateness of the dress.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
I'm not commenting on any of that. I'm just saying you want to see a bunch of folks who were gelled when it comes to hating Mitch McConnell instantly turn into people who, can't read one another's feeds. Go look at the reaction on the left. People who are supposed to be allies to the tax the rich dress.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. I'll just add really quickly that I put out a tweet from the Progress Network about a new member's book. We also did a podcast episode about this. Books everywhere, podcast episodes everywhere. And I just, as an aside, it was like, if you were, if you saw AOC's Tax the Rich dress, you might be interested in this book. And then all these Twitter trolls emerged about the dress. And I was like, that's not even the point of the tweet. I can't believe how... Anyway, I just wanted to back up your example.
It's predictable. Or defund the police. Same thing, right? Like once the conversation among the allies, gets to having to assert some positive policy proposal, if the alliance is heavily belief polarized, you start seeing the only thing these people really agree about is they like to one up each other about how much they hate the other side. politics can't be about hating the other side only.
Yeah.
Politics has to also be about, okay, what are we going to do? Well, defund the police. Well, what does that mean? Well, some people say, well, they shouldn't have as much money as they do. Well, yeah, that seems to me to be hard to deny. Towns of 1 square mile in New Jersey with, multi-million-dollar budgets for army vehicles. But other people abolish the police. And you saw this last year, where people just who were supposed to be political allies, as soon as it turned to trying to work out what the positive stance was supposed to be about policing in the United States, couldn't get it together. And what happened? All of the animosity, all of the aggression, all of the demonizing, all of the toxicity turned internally against people who are supposed to be allies. You take away the big old bad guy everyone's supposed to hate, and then the political alliance falls apart. The belief polarization phenomenon, as I spell it out in the book, says, yeah, that's completely unsurprising, absolutely predictable. And that is the thing that needs, you can still hate the other side, I'm even saying, right? Maybe the other side deserves all of your animosity. Maybe it deserves to be looked at like, maybe it deserves to be demonized. Who knows? Maybe it does, but certainly certain kinds of opponents deserve that. But politics can't just be about how you get on with your opponents. Really, the issue is, how are you going to sustain workable, efficient, and effective democratic relations with your allies? That's the problem we overlook.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying here too, also about the need, this fundamental ask for constructive vision. It can't just be about the other side is wrong. There has to be a there of this is what we're moving toward. And that does seem to be missing quite a lot as well these days. So Bob, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
I feel like
good to talk to you.
Yes, you too. And, for everybody watching, if you made it all the way to the end, pick up Sustaining Democracy and also the prequel, Overdoing Democracy. And you heard it from Bob. You're free to go ahead and hate the other side. So that's the other takeaway from this. Anyway, Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma. It's really great talking to you. And, I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah.